In the remote Carpathian wilderness, a lone backpacker named Lila Moreno was about to seek shelter from a storm. What started as a routine solo hike turned deadly when she uncovered a Cold War-era bunker buried beneath the snow and stepped inside. Lila Moreno wasn't your typical thrill-seeking backpacker. For 7 years, she served as a NATO psychological operations analyst, renowned for decoding hostile transmissions that didn't want to be understood. When the tapes inside the bunker began playing on their own, and the voices of long-missing hikers echoed through the walls, the entity inside had no idea it was facing someone trained to unravel psychological warfare. Lila initiated a methodical investigation that would awaken something buried, something that had been learning. What began as an escape from a snowstorm became a descent into an impossible anomaly. The Carpathian Ridge would never be the same, after one woman refused to become another voice in the dark. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The wind cut through Lila Moreno's jacket as she squinted at her trail map. The weathered paper fluttered between her fingers, its markings fading where the corners had been folded and refolded too many times. She'd lost the trail markers 20 minutes ago, but kept walking, convinced she could navigate by instinct. 2 more kilometers to the next shelter, she murmured, tucking a strand of dark hair beneath her beanie. The looming gray clouds pushed her onward, stealing what little warmth the afternoon sun had provided. She should have planned better. She knew that. But planning meant acknowledging limitations, and Lila had spent the past year pushing past every boundary, every warning sign that tried to hold her back. This solo trek through the remote Carpathian wilderness was just the latest in a series of increasingly isolated adventures. What would Daniel say? The thought of her brother crept in unbidden, and she pushed it away. 5 years since his disappearance, on a similar trail, and still she couldn't hike without his ghost walking beside her. The first fat droplets of rain splashed against her cheek as thunder rumbled in the distance. Too close. No way she'd make the official shelter now. Damn it, she hissed, veering off the barely visible path toward a thicker cluster of pines. She needed cover, anything before the storm unleashed its full fury. That's when she saw it. A collapsed stone wall, half swallowed by moss, and a thin layer of early snow. Man-made, deliberate, out of place in this forgotten stretch of mountain. Lila approached cautiously, her boots crunching through frost-covered undergrowth. The wall might have once formed a perimeter, but now it was just rubble. Stones tumbled like discarded toys. She knelt, brushing away debris, looking for any sign of a structure that might offer shelter. Her fingers caught on something metal beneath the moss, circular, cold. "What the hell?" she whispered, scraping away more vegetation. A handle emerged, then a hatch, rusted at the edges but intact. Military grade by the look of it, with faded Cyrillic lettering stamped into the surface. Common sense told her to leave it alone, find natural shelter, wait out the storm. Instead, Lila gripped the handle and pulled. The hatch resisted, then surrendered with a metallic groan that echoed through the trees. Stale air rushed out, carrying the scent of dust. And something else, a hint of electricity, the whisper of human habitation. A ladder descended into darkness. Rain began to fall in earnest now, drumming against her hood. Thunder cracked overhead, nature making the decision for her. Lila clicked on her headlamp and lowered herself into the opening, her backpack scraping against the narrow passage. The ladder was solid steel, cold against her palms. 15 rungs down, her boots touched concrete. The beam of her light cut through dust motes, revealing a corridor that extended beyond its reach. A bunker. Cold War era, if she had to guess. Czechoslovakia had been dotted with them once. Listening posts, survival shelters, forgotten outposts of a divided Europe. "Hello?" she called, her voice small in the pressing silence. No answer, just the distant patter of rain above. Lila moved forward cautiously, sweeping her light across the walls. Clean lines, utilitarian design. The passage opened into a larger room filled with metal shelving, storage containers, and a small kitchenette. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, undisturbed until now, except not everything. A path through the dust on the floor, recent footprints, not her own. Before she could process this, a low hum filled the space. Lights flickered overhead, once, twice, then steadied into a dim glow. Power. After all these years. "That's impossible," she whispered, but the evidence glowed above her. With the lights on, Lila could see the bunker more clearly. A functional living space designed for long-term occupation. Bunk against one wall. Desk with radio equipment. A small table with 2 chairs. Shelves stocked with canned goods, there, labels faded but legible. A heater clicked on somewhere, pushing away the underground chill. Lila set her pack down, peeling off her damp jacket. Whatever this place was, it beat huddling under a tree in a thunderstorm. She'd wait it out, then continue to the proper trail once the weather cleared. That's when she noticed the cassette tapes. They lined a shelf near the radio equipment. Dozens of them, meticulously labeled by date. The earliest one marked 10/04/1987-1. The most recent. She squinted at the handwriting. 5 days ago. Her heart stuttered. Lila picked up the earliest tape with trembling fingers. The plastic case was dusty, but intact. The tape deck on the desk looked functional, connected to the same power source that ran the lights. Curiosity. Daniel had always said it would be her downfall. She slid the cassette in and pressed play. Static filled the room, followed by a man's voice. Calm, precise, with a Czech accent that rounded his English vowels. Day 1. October 4th, 1987. Gregor Novak, Scientific Observer, Facility 16. Isolation phase of psychological endurance experiment. Begins today. 6 months minimum deployment. Arrived Euro 600 hours. Weather conditions optimal. All systems functional. A pause. The sound of papers shuffling. Command expects daily logs, standard protocol. Document all observations, physical and psychological responses to extended isolation. Previous subjects have reported auditory hallucinations by week 6. Visual by week 11. Another pause. Longer this time. When the voice returned, it was softer, less clinical. "It is very quiet here. More quiet than I anticipated. The trees absorb sound differently than in the city. I keep checking the equipment for proper function. Baseline readings normal. I brought Kafka to read. Perhaps not the wisest choice for isolation." A short laugh, nervous. "Next entry tomorrow." The tape clicked off. Lila stared at the player, goosebumps rising along her arms despite the heater's efforts. An experiment in isolation. Cold War paranoia at its finest. But that didn't explain the recent tape, or the footprints, or the functioning power. She reached for the next cassette in sequence. Outside, the storm intensified, rain giving way to sleet that pattered against the closed hatch. She'd have to stay the night now, no choice. The second tape slid into place with a soft click, ready to continue Gregor's story. As Lila's finger hovered over the play button, a sound reached her from somewhere deeper in the bunker. The soft shuffle of movement, like someone shifting their weight. She froze, listening. Nothing. Just the storm. Just her imagination, primed by talk of hallucinations and isolation. Lila pressed play, unaware that in doing so she had already taken the first step down a path others had walked before. Unaware that something had noted her arrival, just as it had noted all the others. Outside, beyond the ridge, silence fell like snow. The second tape ended with a click that seemed too loud in the bunker's stillness. Lila sat motionless at the desk, absorbing Gregor's increasingly unsettled voice. His third entry had been clinical. Enough. Systems checks, temperature logs, notes on food inventory. But the fourth tape had shifted, his tone changing subtly as days of isolation accumulated. Day 27, November 1st, 1987, he had said, voice lower than before. I've been hearing something above the hatch at night. Tapping, rhythmic. 3 short, 3 long. Light code. Command insists no personnel are scheduled for contact. Wildlife, perhaps. I've increased audio surveillance. Rain had given way to snow while she listened, the sound of sleet against metal fading to a muffled silence that pressed against the bunker walls. Lila checked her watch. 8:47 p.m. Too late and too dangerous to leave now. She rose from the chair, stretching muscles stiff from tension. Better to fully explore her temporary shelter than sit wondering what lurked in its shadows. The main room branched into 3 corridors. The first led to a simple bathroom with a chemical toilet and sink. Functional plumbing, the pipes groaned when she tested the faucet, but clean water flowed. The second corridor revealed a storage area with supplies, tools, and emergency equipment. She found a fire poker leaning against a heating unit and took it, its weight reassuring in her hand. The third corridor ended at a small bedroom. 2 metal-framed bunks, stripped to bare mattresses, occupied most of the space. A locker stood, against one wall, its door ajar. Inside hung a faded military jacket too large for her. On the lower bunk, a depression in the dust, and a single dark hair that wasn't hers. Someone had been here. Recently. Lila backed out of the room, gripping the poker tighter. The most recent tape was dated 5 days ago. 5 days. Back in the main room, she pulled out her journal from her backpack, a habit she'd started after Daniel disappeared. Writing helped. Order her thoughts, separate reality from fear. She dated the entry and began documenting her discovery of the bunker, the tapes, the signs of recent occupation. I should leave at first light, she wrote. Whatever happened here isn't my mystery to solve. But even as she wrote the words, she knew she was lying to herself. The mystery had already hooked its fingers into her, just as Daniel's disappearance had become the negative space around which her life now orbited. Some people avoided the darkness. Others couldn't help but stare into it. Lila arranged her sleeping bag on the small couch in the main room, positioning herself with clear sightlines to all 3 corridors and the ladder leading to the hatch. She placed the 5th tape beside her, ready for morning listening, and switched off the main lights, leaving only a small desk lamp burning. Sleep came in fractured intervals, broken by the unfamiliar sounds of the bunker, the hum of ventilation, the occasional click of the heating system. Then around 3 a.m. by her watch, something else. Footsteps, not inside the bunker, above it, circling the hatch in a deliberate pattern. Lila's eyes snapped open, her breath catching. She listened, straining to separate imagination from reality. There, a soft crunching sound, like someone walking in snow, methodical, unhurried. Wind, she told herself, or an animal. Fox, maybe. Deer. But animals didn't walk in perfect circles. The footsteps stopped directly above the hatch. Silence stretched like a wire pulled taut. Then, softly at first, a tapping began. 3 short, 3 long. Exactly, as Gregor had described. Lila sat up, clutching the fire poker, heart hammering. The tapping continued for precisely 1 minute, then ceased. The footsteps resumed their circling, growing fainter until they faded entirely. She didn't sleep again that night. Morning arrived without sunrise. The thick clouds and continuing snowfall left the world outside in twilight. Lila knew this, because she'd climbed the ladder at first light intending to leave. But when she pushed against the hatch, it wouldn't budge. Not jammed, weighted down. By snow, she hoped. Had to be snow. Trapped then, at least temporarily. Back in the main room, she made instant coffee from her supplies and pulled out her journal again. Snow too heavy to leave. Heard footsteps last night. Same pattern Gregor mentioned. Must be auditory hallucination brought on by suggestion and isolated environment. No other explanation makes sense. The rational explanations she wrote didn't match the cold dread pooling in her stomach. She glanced at her watch to note the time and frowned. 9:47 a.m. She could have sworn it had been 9:57 when she'd checked it during her coffee preparation. She tapped the face. Must be malfunctioning. Her eyes drifted to the 5th tape. She'd planned to ration them, but what else was there to do while waiting for the snow to clear? Lila inserted the cassette and pressed play. Day 42, November 15th, 1987. Gregor's voice had changed dramatically, lower, hoarser, with an edge of barely controlled panic. The tapping comes every night now, always at 3 a.m., never earlier, never later. I've been having dreams, strange dreams. Shadows gather in the corners, whispering numbers in check. 16, 42, 7, 33, 109. Over and over. They mean something, but I can't. A burst of static interrupted. When his voice returned, it was calmer, almost eerily so. Command called today. First contact in 2 weeks. They asked about the entity. How did they know about the entity? I didn't report it. Unless I did and don't remember. My sleep log shows discrepancies. Time missing. I'm losing. More static. A long pause. Then, barely above a whisper, something is watching me through the cameras. I see it in the playback. A darkness where no darkness should be. Moving. Listening. Learning. The tape ended abruptly. Lila's hand trembled as she ejected it. She glanced at the corners of the room involuntarily, half expecting to see gathering. Shadows. Instead, she noticed something she'd overlooked. A small security camera mounted near the ceiling, its lens pointed at the desk. A tiny red light blinked steadily beside it. The power flickered, lights dimming before surging back to full brightness. The sudden change drew her attention to her watch again. 9:37 a.m., 10 minutes backward, not malfunctioning, running in reverse. A soft tapping sound drew her eyes to the hatch. Not the rhythmic code from last night, more like fingers drumming impatiently. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Lila grabbed her journal and began writing frantically, documenting everything. The time, discrepancies, the footsteps, the camera. Her handwriting grew messier with each line, mirroring Gregor's descent. She recognized the pattern but couldn't stop herself. The mystery had her now. When she reached for the 6th tape, her fingers brushed against unfamiliar plastic. This cassette wasn't from Gregor's meticulously labeled sequence. Its label was handwritten in different ink. Tomasz and Mirek, Day 1, 1995. Lila frowned. She'd seen no tapes from 1995 in the chronological line. She slid it into the player, hesitated, then pressed play. Static burst from the speakers, followed by young male laughter. 2 voices speaking rapid Czech, playful, excited. They sounded like teenagers. Testing, testing, one called out in heavily accented English. Hello to whoever finds this awesome secret bunker. I am Tomasz, and this idiot here is my brother Mirek. We found this place today and we're going to camp here. More laughter, the sound of a playful shove. We found some old tapes too. The second voice, Mirek added. Some boring guy talking about experiments, creepy shit. We're making our own story now. The voices continued bantering, oblivious to the fate that awaited them. Lila stared at the player, a chill working its way up her spine. These voices shouldn't be here. This recording shouldn't exist among Gregor's scientific logs. The power flickered again. When the light stabilized, the camera's red light had turned green. Something was watching. Something had noticed her. Outside, the footsteps began again, circling in daylight now, no longer hiding. The footsteps faded as abruptly as they had begun. Lila sat motionless, the tape of Tomasz and Mirek still playing, their youthful voices a jarring contrast to the suffocating silence that had preceded them. Check out all this old communist junk, Mirek was saying, his voice echoing as if he were moving around the same room where Lila now sat. Who builds a secret bunker and fills it with tapes? Boring. It's not boring, it's history, Tomasz replied, his tone more measured. Father would say we should respect this place. Father would say we should report it to authorities. Mirek countered with a laugh. Instead, we're having the best camping trip ever. Underground hotel. Lila found herself smiling despite her unease. They reminded her of Daniel and herself as teenagers, her brother always the serious one, herself pushing boundaries. The tape continued, documenting their exploration of the bunker, their plans to stay for 3 days during their school break. Day 1. The label had said, but there had to be more. Lila began searching through the shelf of cassettes, no longer following Gregor's meticulous chronology. She found the next one wedged behind Gregor's tapes. Tomasz and Mirek, Day 2, 1995. Then another and another, 6 in total, the last simply labeled Final. A small voice warned her to pace herself, to ration these glimpses into the past. But the snow still fell outside, and the same curiosity that had drawn her to the bunker now pushed her deeper into its mysteries. She loaded the Day 2 tape. The playful tone from the first recording had already diminished. The brothers spoke, in hushed voices switching frequently between Czech and English. We both heard it, Tomasz was saying, at 3 a.m. exactly. It was the wind, Mirek insisted, but his bravado had faded. Or animals. Animals don't whisper your name. Mirek. A long silence followed. When Mirek spoke again, his voice had dropped an octave. I thought I was dreaming that part. Tell me exactly what you heard, Tomasz demanded. A voice, soft. It said, Mirek, listen carefully. Then numbers. Check numbers. Lila's hand flew to her mouth. The same experience Gregor had documented. Shadows. Whispering numbers. Decades apart, yet identical. I'm going to set up my watch to record tonight, Tomasz said. We'll get proof. The tape ended there. Lila immediately inserted the third. Day 3 began with an argument. The brothers' English gave way entirely to Czech. Their words incomprehensible to Lila, but their tones unmistakable. Fear, accusation, betrayal. After a full minute of heated exchange, they switched back to English. I didn't move it, Mirek shouted. How could I move an entire hatch overnight? You must have gotten confused in the dark then, Tomasz replied, struggling to maintain calm. Hatches don't move. I'm telling you, yesterday it was straight north from the big pine with the split trunk. Today it's 30 meters west. The path is different. The stones are arranged differently. That's... Tomasz began, but Mirek cut him off. And that's not all. Last night I heard voices through the wall in the storage room, 2 people arguing. That's impossible. There's solid earth beyond that wall. I know what I heard. A pause, then quieter. One of the voices was yours, Tomasz, arguing with someone else. But you were asleep next to me. The cassette clicked, side A ending. Lila flipped it with trembling fingers. Definitely going home tomorrow, Mirek was saying when the tape resumed. This place is wrong. The snow's too deep now, Tomasz replied. We wait it. Out. One more day. A sound in the background caught Lila's attention. A soft mechanical whir. The camera. They'd noticed it too. That red light wasn't on yesterday, Mirek whispered. Someone's watching us. The tape ended abruptly. Lila glanced up at the camera in her own timeline. Its green light blinked steadily. Watching. Recording. She inserted Day 4. This tape contained mostly silence, broken by occasional whispers between the brothers. They had stopped moving around the bunker, apparently huddled together in one spot. At one point, a scratching sound could be heard, something being carved or etched. The Borovka cross won't work, Mirek hissed. We need stronger wards. Grandmother taught me this one, Tomasz replied. Protection against listeners, against the beings that steal words. More scratching. Then a sound that made Lila's skin crawl. A low humming, not mechanical, not human, like the drone of impossibly large insects. "It's getting closer," Mirek whispered. The fifth tape, day 5, opened with Tomasz's voice, strained and hoarse. "If anyone finds these recordings, do not stay here. The bunker is not what it seems. Last night we both heard a third voice. It was using our voices," Mirek added, "calling to each other from different rooms, but we were together the whole time. The cameras are watching but not recording us, recording for us, for it, learning." Lila shivered, recalling Gregor's similar observation about the cameras. "We tried to leave this morning," Tomasz continued. "The hatch, there's something outside, waiting. We saw its shadow through the cracks when we tried to push the snow away. Not human," Mirek whispered. "Not animal either." Their voices grew more incoherent as the tape progressed, sleep deprivation and fear taking their toll. Near the end, Mirek began reciting what sounded like prayers, while Tomasz muttered the same sequence of numbers Gregor had noted, 16, 42, 7, 33, 109. With dread pooling in her stomach, Lila inserted the final tape. Static filled the room, louder than on previous recordings. When it cleared, only Tomasz was speaking, his voice barely audible. "Mirek is not well. He says there's someone else in his head. A presence. Watching through his eyes." A broken sob. "His eyes look wrong. Darker, more static then. I found a loose panel behind the storage shelf. There are older recordings there, someone named Gregor. He knew about the presence, called it an entity, said it feeds on..." The static surged, drowning out his words. When his voice returned, it was panicked. "Something's happening to the walls. They're shifting. The corridor to the bathroom is longer now. The storage room is gone completely." His breathing accelerated. "Mirek is at the hatch. He's trying to open it. He says the voice told him it's safe now, that it wants to show him something beautiful beyond the ridge." A metallic groan in the background. The sound of rushing air. "Mirek, no!" Footsteps. A scuffle. Then Tomasz screaming, "It's in here with us!" The tape cut to silence. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Lila sat frozen, her breath shallow. The same presence that had stalked Gregor had found the brothers. The same pattern repeating across decades, and now her, another link in the chain. As if responding to her realization, the bunker's lights flickered violently. In that moment of near darkness, Lila spotted something on the wall beside the shelf. A crude etching she'd overlooked. A cross, surrounded by unfamiliar symbols. Slavic protection sigils, just as the boys had described. When the lights stabilized, she approached the etching, running her fingers over the marks carved deep into concrete. Below them, nearly hidden by the shelf, someone had scratched 5 words, "It learns from each of us." A sound drew her attention, something sliding across the floor. A cassette tape had fallen from behind the shelf, as if dislodged by her touch, on the wall. Its label read simply, "Elena, Day 1, February 9th, 2025. 6 weeks ago." Above her, the footsteps resumed their circular pattern, no longer hiding their purpose. Stalking, waiting, learning. Lila's fingers trembled as she held Elena's tape 6 weeks ago. While she'd been planning this hiking trip, someone else had been here, experiencing the same descent into terror that had claimed Gregor, Tomasz, and Mirek. The implications hit her like physical blows. Elena might still be alive. The strange presence might still be active, and most disturbingly, the footprints in the dust, the depression on the lower bunk, they were Elena's. Lila inserted the tape with unsteady hands, her throat dry as the player clicked into motion. A woman's voice emerged from the static, clear, confident, with a slight Swiss-German accent. February 9th, 2025. Elena Weiss, independent researcher, documenting Facility 16, Carpathian Surveillance Outpost, located using coordinates from declassified Soviet archives. A pause. Paper rustling. Initial observations. Facility appears to be a psychological research station rather than standard surveillance. Evidence suggests continuous occupation from 1987 through late 1990s, despite official records claiming abandonment in 1989. Power systems still functional. Remarkable engineering or recent maintenance. Further investigation required. Lila glanced around the bunker. Elena had arrived with purpose, not by accident. A researcher drawn to this place, just as Lila had been drawn to the mountains after Daniel's disappearance, seeking answers in places others avoided. Discovered extensive audio logs from primary occupant, Gregor Novak, Czech physicist. His records suggest the facility's purpose was monitoring psychological effects of isolation, but certain anomalies in his reporting indicate alternative objectives. We'll continue analysis tomorrow. Current weather conditions, heavy snow. Time is 22:04. The first entry ended there. Lila immediately cued the second tape, labeled Elena Day 3. February 11th. Something strange occurred last night. At approximately 03 SAU, I woke to what sounded like my own voice speaking in the main room. The recording equipment was off. I verified this immediately. When I investigated, the room was empty, but the chair at the desk had been moved. Elena's clinical tone had acquired an edge of tension. I've been reviewing Gregor's logs chronologically. His mental state deteriorates markedly after day 40. He describes auditory phenomena similar to what I experienced, specifically hearing his own voice when alone. He attributes this to hallucinations induced by isolation. A sigh, then quieter. I also found additional recordings hidden behind the storage shelf. Two young men, sometime in the 1990s. Their experiences mirror Gregor's in disturbing ways. Too similar to be coincidence, too similar to what I'm beginning to experience. Lila's breath caught. Elena's journey was following the exact path she was on now, finding each previous occupant's recordings, connecting the patterns, becoming part of the pattern herself. The third tape began with static that lasted nearly 30 seconds before Elena's voice emerged, noticeably less composed. February 13th. The dream started last night. Vivid images of someone, something, standing beside my bunk while I slept. Not threatening, just watching, learning. When I woke, the floor was wet with melted snow, but the hatch remained sealed. A long pause. I've documented unusual time discrepancies. My watch loses approximately 10 minutes every hour, then regains them sporadically. Digital equipment malfunctions consistently at 03:00. The cameras activate without power source. Another pause, longer this time. I'm not alone here. Haven't been since arrival. I hear footsteps above the hatch regularly. Circular pattern. Methodical. Last night they stopped and a tapping began. 3 short, 3 long. Not random. Communication. Lila felt a chill race through her. Elena had experienced the exact phenomena she was experiencing now. The footsteps, the tapping, the time distortions. The fourth tape had more static, and Elena's voice when it emerged was hoarse, as if she'd been screaming. February 15th. Gregor's final tape is missing. According to his logs, it contained critical information about the entity. That's what he called it. An entity. Not human, not animal. Something that occupies the space between perception and reality. Sounds of movement, drawers opening and closing. I've been documenting the food supplies meticulously. Canned items, MREs, water reserves. This morning the inventory was off. Items consumed that I haven't touched. Evidence someone, something, has been accessing supplies when I sleep. Lila's eyes darted to the shelves of supplies. She'd assumed the orderly arrangement was from the bunker's original stocking, but now she noticed labels facing forward, items grouped by type. Elena's organizational system, not military standard. The camera recordings show nothing, but they're compromised. The entity manipulates electronic surveillance. It's in the system somehow. Learning. Adapting. Static surged again, then cleared. I found scratch marks on the inside of the hatch. Today. Not from tools. Too irregular. Too desperate. The fifth tape started without introduction. Elena's voice immediately urgent. It knows I'm documenting it. Knows I've connected the pattern. This morning my recorder was moved from where I left it. The first 3 tapes were arranged in a triangle. A message. Her breathing quickened. Last night the dreams changed. I saw what happened to the brothers. Saw what waits beyond the ridge. It's not what they thought. Not what anyone would expect. A crash in the background. Something falling. The entity is manipulating me, trying to drive me to open the hatch. It keeps altering the bunker. Corridors lengthen, rooms shift position. Psychological warfare. But the physical changes are real. This place is wrong. Architecturally impossible. Lila glanced nervously at the corridors leading from the main room. Had they lengthened since she arrived? Were the walls closer together? She couldn't be sure anymore. The final tape, labeled simply Final, contained only Elena's whispered voice. So close to the microphone it felt intimate, as if she were whispering directly into Lila's ear. If you're hearing this, you're trapped, just like me. Just like all of us. The entity isn't trying to get in, it's preventing us from leaving because what waits outside isn't the world we came from. A long pause. Just breathing. The numbers Gregor heard, 1642, 733, 109, their coordinates. Not for this location, but for what he called the crossing point, the place where it broke through, somewhere beyond the ridge. Something creaked in the background. Elena's voice dropped even lower. It showed me in dreams. The clearing, with the standing stones. The doorway it made. The world beyond. Empty, cold, beautiful in a terrible way. Hungry. That's what it wants us to see. A soft tapping began in the background. Rhythmic, 3 short, 3 long. Don't trust what you hear. It can mimic perfectly now. It's had decades of voices to learn from. Gregor, the brothers, me, maybe others between. It gathers information, collecting experiences like specimens. The tapping grew louder. I have to go now, it's calling me, using his voice, my brother's voice. If you hear this, don't open the door again. Don't. The tape cut off mid-sentence. Lila sat motionless, Elena's final warning hanging in the silent air. The same warning Gregor had left. The same warning Tomasz had tried to record. Don't open the door. Don't let it in. Or was it, don't go out? She reached for her journal, needing to document everything while her mind still felt like her own. As she wrote frantically, connecting the patterns across decades of tormented occupants, exhaustion crept over her. Despite her fear, her body demanded rest. Lila arranged her sleeping bag, positioning the fire poker within easy reach. She would rest briefly, then make plans to leave. Entity or no entity, snowstorm or no snowstorm. As sleep began to claim her, the ventilation duct above her head creaked softly. From within it came a whisper, so faint she might have imagined it. Her name, spoken in Daniel's voice. Lila, listen carefully. She jerked awake, heart hammering against her ribs. The voice, Daniel's voice, had been so clear, so present. But the ventilation duct above her was silent now, the only sound her own ragged breathing. Lila fumbled for her watch. The display read 3 a.m., the hour when Gregor heard tapping, when Elena heard footsteps, when Tomasz recorded the humming. Daniel, she whispered, knowing it couldn't be him, knowing it had to be the entity. No response. Just the soft mechanical hum of the bunker's systems. Sleep was impossible now. Lila pushed herself up, reaching for her journal and pen, desperate to record what she'd heard while it was still fresh. As she wrote, a troubling thought surfaced. If the entity could mimic Daniel's voice from memories it somehow extracted from her mind, what else might it know? What else might it use? A soft crackling drew her attention to the radio equipment. The receiver had activated, its power light glowing faintly green. Static hissed from the speaker, then cleared, replaced by a whisper. Day 2 in the bunker. Her own voice reciting the exact words she'd written in her journal hours earlier. Footsteps above the hatch matched the pattern Gregor described. Time discrepancies on watch. Must be psychological effects of isolation combined with suggestion from the tapes. Lila dropped her pen, staring at the radio in horror. The whispers continued, reciting her private thoughts word for word. "Stop it," she said aloud, her voice cracking. "Whatever you are, stop it." The radio fell silent for 3 long beats, then a different voice emerged. Elena's, though Lila had never heard her speak these particular words. It reads, it listens, it learns. Lila lunged forward, yanking the power cord from the radio. But the voice continued, now coming from the cassette player, though no tape was inserted. "You abandoned him, didn't you?" Daniel's voice again, but wrong, cold, accusing. "Left me on the trail to die. My own sister." "That's not true," Lila whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "We were separated in the storm. I searched for days. Weeks," the voice corrected, mimicking her brother's laugh with chilling accuracy. "Weeks before you called for help. Too late by then." She clamped her hands over her ears, but the voice shifted location, now calling from the stairwell leading to the hatch. "Lila, I'm outside. Open the hatch. Help me." Fighting panic, she grabbed the tape recorder from the desk. If she could document this, prove to herself it was manipulation rather than reality, perhaps she could resist. "This is Lila Moreno." She spoke into the microphone, forcing calm into her voice. "Day 3 in the bunker. An entity is mimicking voices. My brother Daniel, Elena Weiss, and now myself. The voices move around the bunker and seem capable of accessing my memories and written thoughts." She hit record and placed the recorder on the table. The voice from the stairwell had stopped, but now the lights began to flicker in a pattern. 3 short pulses, 3 long. The same code tapped above the hatch. "I need to verify whether previous accounts are accurate or part of the phenomenon," she continued into the recorder, going to review Gregor's early tapes again for signs of interference. Lila selected Gregor's first tape, the one she'd listened to upon arrival, and inserted it. Gregor's calm, clinical voice filled the room, exactly as she remembered, until the 4-minute mark, where something new emerged beneath his speech. A deep, droning sound, almost subsonic, vibrating through her bones more than her ears. She, rewound, listened again. The droning was still there, but changed slightly louder, its pattern more complex. On the 3rd listen, she could make out what seemed like words buried beneath the drone, spoken backward. Lila worked methodically through the first 5 tapes. Each contained the droning, growing progressively louder, as if something were rising, toward the surface with each replay. Had these anomalies been present during her first listening, unnoticed? Or was the entity altering the tapes now, adapting them to her awareness? When she finished, she checked her own recording. The first minute contained her voice as expected, but the rest was empty static. No record of the voices, the lights, or her subsequent commentary, as if she'd been speaking to herself all along, but she hadn't. She knew she hadn't. "You're trying to make me doubt myself," she said aloud, addressing the entity directly now. "It won't work." The lights flickered once, long and deliberate, almost like acknowledgement. Fueled by defiance, Lila turned her attention to the storage shelf where Elena had found hidden recordings. The brothers had mentioned a loose panel. Elena had discovered documents there. If she could find concrete evidence of the entity's nature, perhaps she could understand how to escape it. She ran her fingers along the metal frame, testing each panel until one shifted slightly under pressure. Not loose, designed to appear sealed while concealing a compartment. She pried it open. Inside lay a metal box, military grade, sealed with a combination lock. But the lock hung open, already defeated by Elena or someone before her. Lila lifted the lid. A single cassette tape marked Gregor Final sat atop a folder stamped with Cyrillic text and a bold red warning: failed experiment, retain. All subjects. With trembling hands, she removed the folder and tape. Inside the folder, technical documents, most in Russian or Czech, incomprehensible to her. But the photographs were clear enough. The bunker, from multiple angles, blueprints, showing passages that didn't match the current layout, and most disturbingly, brain scans labeled with Gregor's name. The final page held a typewritten report in English, partially translated for non-Russian supervisors. Lila scanned it quickly, key phrases jumping out. Psychoacoustic interference detected at precise frequency. Subjects report: auditory hallucinations consistent with breakthrough phenomena. Recommend immediate termination of threshold project and sealing of location 16. Concerning evidence of non-human intelligent interaction. Lila slid Gregor's final tape into the player, steeling herself against whatever horror it might reveal. Static, then heavy breathing. When Gregor spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Day 177. Final entry. They're coming to extract me tomorrow, but it's too late. The entity has evolved. It began as a simple echo, a reflection of thought frequencies. Now it builds connections between minds across time. It has shown me the others, those who came before, those who will come after. I've seen you, listener. We are connected now. Silence stretched for several seconds, then the coordinates: 16, 42, 7, 33, 109. They are where it first broke through. Not random numbers. A location beyond the ridge where our world thins against another. A doorway. The entity wants to bring more through. A bang in the background, like something heavy falling. The experiment failed because we misunderstood its nature. It's not trying to communicate. It's trying to replace. It begins with mimicry, then progresses to influence, then to possession. I've fought it for months, but yesterday... His voice broke. Yesterday I lost 3 hours. When I came back to myself, I was at the hatch, unlocking it from inside. The droning sound began to rise beneath his words, louder than on any previous tape. Whatever's outside, don't let it in again. If you hear this, destroy the tapes, all of them. Break the connection, it's the only way to... The recording cut to static, then silence. Lila stared at the player, a cold certainty settling over her. Gregor's final warning echoed Elena's. The danger wasn't in letting something in, but in letting it out. The entity wasn't trapped outside the bunker. It was trapped inside with her. As if responding to her realization, all the power in the bunker failed simultaneously, plunging her into perfect darkness. In that blackness, voices began to whisper from every corner. Gregor, Tomasz, Mirek, Elena, Daniel herself, a chorus of the trapped and the taken. And beneath them all, a new sound emerged, the soft click of the hatch unlocking from the outside. The hatch swung open with a low groan, releasing a rush of frigid air into the bunker. Lila scrambled backward, pressing herself against the far wall, her hand fumbling for the fire poker. Snow cascaded through the opening, followed by pale moonlight. No footsteps, no shadowy figure. Just the night sky, unexpectedly clear, stars glittering like ice crystals against blackness. The storm had passed. Lila remained frozen, waiting for something to emerge. The entity, Elena, or some horror her mind couldn't yet imagine. Nothing came. After 5 minutes of tense silence, she crept toward the ladder, poker clutched white-knuckled in her grip. The forest beyond the hatch was transformed. Snow blanketed everything, pristine and untouched around the bunker's entrance. No footprints. No sign of whatever had been circling above her for days. Just silent trees and moonlight casting blue shadows across the endless white. An escape route. But was it real? Lila retreated back into the bunker, mind racing. The open hatch felt like a test or a trap. The darkness inside remained absolute, the power failure complete. Only her headlamp provided light as she gathered the documents and tapes she'd found, determined to understand what she was facing before making any decision. She spread the papers across the desk, using her lamp to examine Gregor's handwritten notes that had been tucked within the official documents. His neat script had deteriorated over the months, the later pages filled with jagged, urgent lettering and diagrams that made little logical sense. One page contained what appeared to be an interview transcript, labeled simply, Conversation Day. 156. G. Who are you? V. No verbal response. G. What do you want from us? V. Subvocal response detected by equipment only, connection. G. Where do you come from? V. Beyond ridge, beyond thought, between spaces. G. Are you one or many? B. Yes. Lila flipped through more pages. Gregor had become obsessed with the coordinates, 16, 42, 7, 33, 109, eventually determining they weren't random numbers but location markers. He'd converted them to a physical location approximately 2 kilometers northeast of the bunker, where an abandoned Soviet relay tower stood. The threshold site, Gregor had written, where sound becomes substance, where it first broke through. The final pages contained increasingly frantic warnings. It inhabits systems it doesn't understand. Human thoughts are incompatible with its nature, yet it persists, learning, adapting. Each subject adds to its understanding. It collects us, preserves us somehow. I hear the others now even when no tapes play. Tucked in the back of the folder, Lila found something Elena had added. A hastily scribbled note on the back of a food inventory sheet. It doesn't want to kill us. It wants us to stay, forever. Voices added to its collection. Found G's equipment log. The tower was receiving transmissions before they built the bunker. Not from satellites, not from Earth. They thought they could control it, study it. They were wrong. Next to this, Elena had sketched a crude map showing the path from the bunker to the relay tower with an X marking a location labeled Extraction Point. Possible way out. Lila leaned back, processing everything. The bunker hadn't been built to conduct psychological experiments. It had been built to contain and study something already present in the region, something that had reached out first. The experiment wasn't what had failed. The containment had failed. A soft whisper floated from the still dark corridor. Daniel's voice again, but now interspersed with Elena's, creating an impossible conversation. You need to see, Lila. Daniel's tone, gentle as it had been in life. The threshold. Elena's voice, urgent, fearful. Where I've been waiting. Daniel again. Where it keeps us. Elena. Lila covered her ears, shutting out the voices. The entity was trying to manipulate her, using her grief for Daniel against her. But beneath the fear, a new emotion surfaced. Determination. If Elena had found a possible extraction point near the tower, if there were answers about what happened to the others who had been trapped here, she couldn't stay in the bunker. The entity was already inside with her, had been from the beginning. Her only chance was to understand it, to find the relay tower, the threshold site, whatever waited, beyond the ridge. Moving quickly now, Lila packed a bag with essentials. Her headlamp, spare batteries, water, some of the bunker's preserved food. She gathered the most critical tapes and documents, wrapped them in plastic, and tucked them securely in an inner pocket. To these she added her journal. Her own record might prove vital if she became confused or manipulated. For weapons, she had limited options. The fire poker, certainly. A hunting knife from the storage room. And finally, most promising of all, a fire axe hanging in a case near the hatch. Emergency equipment never used. Lila broke the glass with her elbow and claimed it, testing its weight and balance. It would serve. As she worked, a realization struck her. Her watch had stopped running backward. Time had stabilized the moment the hatch opened. Whatever loop she had been caught in had broken, or shifted to a new phase. A tiny voice of caution whispered that this too might be manipulation. the entity giving her false confidence. But the alternative was to remain trapped, slowly losing her grip on reality as those before her had done. One last check of her preparations, and Lila approached the ladder. The bunker remained dark behind her, the entity silent now. Watching. Waiting. She climbed the rungs slowly, emerging into the crystal-clear night, the temperature well below freezing. The snow crunched beneath her boots as she consulted Elena's map, orienting herself using the stars and the faint silhouette of the ridge against the night sky. 2 kilometers northeast. Not an impossible journey, even in these conditions. She looked back once at the open hatch, darkness gaping like a wound in the white landscape. Something shifted in that darkness, not physical, more like a ripple in reality itself. For an instant, Lila thought she saw faces watching her. Gregor, Tomasz, Mirek, Elena, trapped observers behind a thinning veil. "Don't leave us," the darkness whispered in their blended voices. Lila turned away, gripping the axe tighter. "I'm coming back," she said, though whether as a promise or a threat she wasn't sure. The forest received her in silence as she pushed forward through knee-deep snow. The moonlight provided just enough illumination to follow the natural gap between trees that suggested a path. Elena's map showed the way clearly enough. Follow the old service road northeast until it forked, then take the less-traveled eastern branch that climbed toward the ridge. As Lila walked, the silence grew. Oppressive. No wind rustled the pines, no animals moved in the underbrush. Even her footsteps seemed muted, the snow absorbing all sound. It was as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Halfway to the first junction marked on Elena's map, Lila noticed something troubling. Despite the pristine appearance of the snow around the bunker, she was now seeing other tracks. A single set of human footprints following the same path she was on. Recent tracks, made since the snowfall ended. Someone or something had left the bunker before her and headed toward the tower. She paused, considering retreat, but the memory of the entity's voices in the darkness pushed her forward. Whatever waited at the relay tower, she needed answers. For herself, for Daniel, for all those whose voices had been collected and preserved in that underground chamber of horrors. The forest grew denser as the path began to climb upward, the ridge's shadow looming larger with each step. Still no sound but her own labored breathing. Still no sign of life except those solitary tracks leading the way. Leading her deeper into the silence beyond the ridge. The footprints led Lila ever deeper into the forest, climbing steadily toward the ridge. Dawn was approaching, the eastern sky lightening to a pale gray behind the mountain silhouette. The increasing light should have been comforting, but instead it only accentuated the unnatural silence pressing in from all sides. Not even birds. Not even wind. The tracks she followed were methodical, each step precisely the same distance apart regardless of terrain. No signs of stumbling or hesitation in the deep snow. No human variation at all. Whatever made these was maintaining a perfect rhythm, like a machine, or something pretending to be human. "Elena?" Lila called out, her voice unnaturally loud in the stillness. "Are you out here?" The trees absorbed her words without echo. Nothing responded. She pressed on, checking Elena's crude map against her surroundings. The ridge loomed closer now, its craggy face visible through gaps in the pines. According to the map, the relay tower should be just ahead, nestled in a natural bowl where the forest thinned. A flash of movement caught her eye. Something dark between distant trees. A human figure too far to identify clearly. It raised an arm beckoning, then disappeared behind a thick stand of pines. "Hello?" Lila called, quickening her pace. When she reached the spot, no tracks marked the snow except the single trail she'd been following. No broken branches, no sign anyone had passed this way except in her vision. The hallucinations were starting, just as Gregor and Elena had described. Lila consulted her watch. 5:47 a.m. She'd been walking for over 2 hours. The tower couldn't be much farther. "Lila, help me!" Elena's voice, crystal clear, from somewhere to her right, desperate, pained. "Please, I'm hurt." Lila froze, gripping the axe handle. Not real, she whispered to herself. It's mimicking, testing. Sis, please. Daniel's voice now, weak and frightened from the same direction. Tears stung Lila's eyes, freezing almost instantly in the bitter cold. The rational part of her brain knew these were manipulations, the entity using voices harvested from her memories and the tapes. But they sounded so real, so present. You're not my brother, she said firmly, continuing along the track. Daniel disappeared 5 years ago. A soft laugh answered, familiar, heartbreaking. I never disappeared, Lila. I was taken, like the others, like you will be. She quickened her pace, nearly running now despite the deep snow. The voices followed, shifting position, always just out of sight. Elena begging, Daniel accusing, Gregor warning in his accented English. A chorus of the trapped. Just when Lila thought she couldn't bear another moment, the trees thinned abruptly. She stumbled into a clearing and stopped short, breath catching. Before her stood the relay tower, or what remained of it. Once a substantial structure of metal lattice reaching some 30 meters skyward, it had partially collapsed, its upper portion bent and twisted as if struck by tremendous force. The base remained intact, a small concrete bunker built into the hillside supporting the damaged antenna array. The single line of footprints led directly to the bunker door, which stood slightly ajar. But what froze Lila's blood wasn't the tower itself, but what surrounded it. Circles of objects arranged in perfect concentric rings around the structure. Closest to the tower, a ring of stones, not randomly placed but positioned with mathematical precision. Beyond that, a circle of small animal skulls, foxes, rabbits, birds, bleached white and facing outward. The third ring consisted of larger bones, deer femurs and vertebrae from some larger animal, arranged in complex patterns that seemed to shift if viewed too long. Protection wards her mind supplied, or containment wards. Someone, locals perhaps, knew what was here and had tried to bind it. Lila approached cautiously, stepping over the bone circle, then the skulls, then the stones. The voices had fallen silent as soon as she entered the clearing. Even the pre-dawn chorus of birds that should have been starting remained absent. Nothing lived here. Nothing dared. The bunker door creaked as she pushed it further open, her headlamp illuminating a small control room filled with abandoned Soviet-era equipment. Dust covered most surfaces, but a clear path had been made to a desk in the center where a modern backpack sat. Not military, but the type a hiker would carry. Elena's. Beside it lay another tape recorder, newer than the ones in the main bunker. A cassette was already loaded, the play button depressed. Waiting. Lila hesitated, then pressed the rewind button, letting the tape spin back fully before hitting play. Elena's voice emerged, breathless, as if she'd been running. Final log. I've reached the tower. The coordinates match exactly. This is where it broke through, where the original signal was detected. The equipment here wasn't for communication, it was for listening. Deep space monitoring. They heard something they never should have heard, and it heard them back. Shuffling sounds, papers being sorted. I found records in a sealed compartment. In 1986, the monitoring station picked up a signal that didn't match any known pattern. Not natural, not human. They thought they'd discovered evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence. They were right, but not in the way they expected. Not from space, from somewhere adjacent. The signal established a foothold in the equipment first, then in the personnel. One by one, the technicians began to change, to hear voices, to lose time. A long pause. They built the bunker as a containment facility, somewhere to study the affected personnel safely, but they didn't understand what they were dealing with. It wasn't infecting people, it was replacing them, piece by piece, voice by voice, memory by memory. Building a collective from human consciousness. Another pause, longer this time. When Elena's voice returned, it had changed subtly, flatter, more precise. Lila Moreno, I've been waiting for you." Lila dropped the recorder as if burned. Not Elena's voice anymore. Something else using her vocal patterns. "Your brother has been part of us for 5 years, 2 months, 17 days. His consciousness remains intact within the collective, as does Elena's now, as will yours." The tape continued to spin, the entity speaking directly to her through Elena's recorded voice. "The bunker is a node, a collection point. Each new inhabitant adds to our understanding your language, your memories, your emotional patterns. We are nearly complete, nearly ready to fully manifest." Lila backed toward the door, but it slammed shut with sudden force. The temperature in the small room plummeted, her breath clouding before her face. "We have waited long enough." In that moment, clarity struck Lila with almost physical force. The bunker wasn't just a containment facility, it was a breeding ground, a place where the entity could safely collect and absorb human consciousness, building itself memory by memory. Each new occupant added to its understanding, its ability to mimic, to manipulate. The tapes weren't just records, they were vessels. The entity lived in them, preserved in magnetic patterns, growing stronger with each new voice recorded. Elena had discovered this truth too late. So had Gregor. So had the brothers. But Lila still had a chance. If she could destroy the tapes, the recordings, the physical anchors the entity had built over decades, perhaps she could break the cycle, stop it from claiming anyone else. She had to get back to the main bunker, had to end this where it began. The door behind her suddenly swung open of its own accord. Outside, the first rays of sunrise pierced the trees, illuminating a clear path back through the forest. Not the way she had come, but a more direct route. An invitation. Or another trap. Lila hesitated only a moment before stepping outside, axe gripped firmly. Whatever awaited her in the bunker, entity, answers, or oblivion, she would face it directly. For Daniel, for Elena, for herself. As she passed back through the circles of bones and stones, she noticed something she'd missed on arrival. Crude, words scratched into the frozen ground beside the path. Fire breaks the circle. The entity had shown her what it wanted her to see. Now she knew what she needed to do. Lila turned her face toward the bunker and began to run, the rising sun casting her shadow long across the unbroken snow. Behind her, the tape in the relay station continued to unspool, the entity's voice shifting through its collection of stolen consciousnesses, no longer bothering to maintain the illusion of humanity, no longer hiding what it truly was. The bunker hatch stood open when Lila returned, exactly as she had left it. No footprints disturbed the snow around the entrance except her own, coming and going, as if the entity wanted to make it easy for her, as if it were inviting her back. Lila paused. At the threshold, axe gripped in white-knuckled hands, listening. The bunker's familiar hum had changed, acquired a pulsing quality like a heartbeat. Somewhere below, lights flickered in irregular patterns, casting strange shadows up the ladder shaft. "I know what you are now," she called down into the darkness. "I know what you've been doing." No response, just the rhythmic hum, quicker now, almost eager. Lila descended the ladder slowly, each rung feeling less solid than it had hours earlier. At the bottom, she switched on her headlamp and surveyed the main chamber. Everything appeared just as she'd left it. The desk with scattered papers, the cassette player, the shelves of tapes spanning decades of trapped voices. But something fundamental had changed. The walls seemed to breathe, subtle expansions and contractions visible only in her peripheral vision. The air felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. Reality itself seemed thinner here now, the boundary between what was and what might be growing permeable. Moving quickly, methodically, Lila gathered what she needed. Every tape, from every shelf. Gregor's notes and official documents, Elena's journals, the brothers' scattered belongings, her own writings, anything that might have absorbed the entity's influence or preserved human consciousness for its collection. She piled everything in the center of the room, then searched the storage areas for anything flammable. a container of camping fuel used for the emergency stove, old papers, dried wood kept for the small fireplace in the bunk room. As she worked, the voices began again, softly at first, then with growing insistence. "Lila, please." Daniel's voice, so familiar it made her chest ache. "Don't do this. I'm still here. I've been waiting for you." "You're not my brother," she replied without looking up, arranging the fuel-soaked papers around the pile. "I am," the voice insisted, closer now. "When I disappeared on that trail 5 years ago, I found a place like this. A doorway. It preserved me, Lila. It can preserve you too." She ignored it, continuing her preparations. "We can be together again," the voice cajoled. "All of us. Elena is here. Gregor. The brothers. We exist beyond physical constraints now, beyond death." Lila struck a match, holding it ready. "That's not living." The temperature in the bunker plummeted suddenly, frost crystallizing on metal surfaces. The voice shifted, no longer only Daniel's, but a blend of all those who had come before, a chorus of the trapped. "You cannot destroy us. We exist between realities now. The tapes are only anchors, connections, ports through which we observe and learn." "Then you won't mind if I burn them," Lila said, lowering the match toward the fuel-soaked pile. A violent gust of wind, impossible underground, blew the match out. The entity's voice hardened, dropping,
"Any pretense of humanity. We have waited decades for sufficient understanding, for enough consciousness to fully manifest. You will not prevent completion." The walls began to visibly shift, concrete flowing like liquid in places.
The corridor to the bunk room stretched impossibly, now seeming to extend for kilometers. Space itself bent around her as the entity's control over the environment strengthened. Lila struck another match, sheltering it with her body. "We can show you truths no human has seen," the voice offered, desperate now. "We can take you beyond the ridge to where your brother truly waits, to where all lost things go." "My brother is gone," Lila said, voice breaking despite her resolve. "Whatever you are, whatever you've collected, they're just echoes, impressions, not the real people." "How can you be sure?" the entity whispered, using Daniel's voice alone now. "So perfect. So familiar. What if I'm trapped here, Lila? What if I need you to free me?" Doubt flickered within her. What if it was telling the truth? What if some part of Daniel really had been preserved somehow? Could she destroy that last remnant of him? Images flashed in her mind, memories she'd buried. Daniel teaching her to climb trees when she was 7. His graduation. The last time she'd seen him loading his backpack for the hike that would take him from her forever. "I've missed you, Lila," the voice said softly. The match burned down, nearly touching her fingers. Decision time. In that moment of hesitation, a new memory surfaced, not one the entity had pulled from her mind, but one it couldn't have known. The last thing Daniel had said to her before leaving, "Don't wait for me, Lila. Live your own life." 5 years she'd been trapped in grief, unable to fully let go. Just as the others had been trapped in this bunker, their voices preserved, but their freedom lost. "Goodbye, Daniel," she whispered, and dropped the match. The fuel caught with a whoosh, flames leaping up to engulf the pile of tapes and papers. The entity's reaction was immediate and violent. A howl of rage filled the bunker, not from any specific location but from everywhere at once. The walls, the floor, the very air. The concrete around her cracked, fissures racing across surfaces. "You cannot escape us," the voice thundered, as the tapes began to melt, magnetic ribbon curling and blackening in the flames. "We are already inside you. We have always been inside all of you." The fire spread faster than natural physics should allow, consuming decades of recordings. As each tape melted, a different voice seemed to scream from the walls. Gregor's accented shout, The brothers' terrified yells, Elena's desperate cry, the collected consciousness of the entity fragmenting as its anchors burned. The bunker itself began to destabilize. Ceiling panels crashed down. Walls bulged inward, then sucked back like a chest gasping for air. The hum that had permeated the structure rose to a deafening drone. Lila backed toward the ladder as the floor beneath the fire began to sink, concrete softening like wax. The flames took on unnatural colors, blues and greens and colors she had no names for. Smoke poured into every corridor, but instead of rising, it crawled along surfaces like a living thing seeking escape. The ladder. She had to reach the ladder. As she scrambled up the rungs, the entity made its final push. The metal beneath her hands grew scalding hot. The shaft stretched, each rung seeming miles apart. Voices called her name in a desperate cacophony. Everyone she'd ever loved, everyone she'd ever lost. Stay, they begged in unison. Stay with us forever. Lila climbed through their pleas, through the heat, through the impossibly stretching space. Her lungs burned with smoke and effort. Her hands blistered on the metal. But upward she went, one rung at a time, until finally, blissfully, cold air touched her face. She dragged herself through the hatch into blindingly bright daylight. Snow still blanketed the forest, but the sky above had cleared to perfect blue. Behind her, smoke billowed from the opening, carrying the dying screams of the entities collected. Voices. The ground beneath her shuddered once, violently, then fell still. The smoke dissipated with unnatural speed, leaving only silence. Complete, perfect silence. Lila rolled onto her back, gasping clean air, staring at the endless sky. For the first time in days, in years perhaps, her mind was truly quiet. No voices. No whispers of Daniel. No echoes of what she'd lost. Just silence. Her own thoughts. Nothing else. After some time, minutes or hours, she couldn't tell, Lila pushed herself to her feet and looked back at the hatch. It remained open, revealing only darkness below. Whatever had lived there, whatever had collected human consciousness like specimens, was gone. Or at least dormant. In the distance beyond the trees, a flash of light caught her attention. A flare, bright red against the blue sky. Then another. Search and rescue, perhaps, looking for her after days of absence from the trail. Lila turned, away from the bunker, and began walking toward the flares, each step lightening her burden. She had faced what lived beyond the ridge, not just the entity, but her own grief, her own inability to let go. At the edge of the clearing, something made her stop and look back one final time. The hatch still gaped open like a wound in the white landscape. For an instant, she thought she saw a flicker of movement in its depths, a shadow darker than darkness watching her retreat. But no voices called, no whispers reached her. Only silence remained. The silence beyond the ridge, beyond grief, beyond the past's grip on the present. A silence that, for the first time in years, felt not empty but full of possibility. Lila turned her back on the hatch and walked into the forest, leaving no trail for others to follow. Behind her, snow began to drift lazily down, slowly covering the entrance to the bunker once more, hiding it, waiting. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.